Welcome aboard, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest. I,
Hello.
Before we go, I just want to thank Salih Hudayar, who I interviewed about an hour ago. He's the foreign minister of East Turkestan, which, of course, is the Uyghur people of the Uyghur people occupied by communist China and government in exile. Young man, very nice guy. And they are really in a tough place over there. This is a real genocide. They're putting hundreds of thousands of people in forced labor camps. They're putting children in what can only be described as mass indoctrination camps, where they're forced to speak Chinese and wear Chinese uniforms, and they're punished, to put it mildly, if they don't observe. And they're colonizing the place by sending in millions of Chinese people who are paid to go there and settle there. So a look at East Turkestan is really a look at what can happen when you have genuine, kind of oppression in the real sense. And Mike, you have an article up on your Substack. Methinks
Yes,
they
sir.
all protest too much, which of course gets to an issue I'd like to go over before I go into my concert of nations theory. Um, and that is, of course, dealing with what's going on in Minneapolis and these paid agitators and radicals, a lot of them, frankly, women who have been radicalized, white, suburban, well to do women, like the woman who was just killed trying to ram an ICE officer with her car. And I guess that. Putting aside the fact that there's nothing new with paid agitators, that goes back, as you say, to the civil rights movement, although that was a more genuine thing. There was paid agitators who are trying to exploit that. In this case, I don't think it is genuine. I think that, picking up criminals who are illegal aliens is not something that, most Americans think is bad. It's not getting like a grassroots support opposing that. I mean, there's some interesting videos out right now of how the media handled this under Obama, and it was a very different tone back then. Now, of course, it's not only is it you have these paid protesters going out and were trained to create havoc with the ICE agents as they try to arrest these violent criminals, but the media is completely complicit, just like they were during the Kristallnacht after George Floyd's death. And I suppose they think that this is going to harm President Trump and it's going to harm the Republicans as the midterms come up. Um,
I don't really think so. I mean,
really?
because, yeah, first of all, uh, there really isn't a change in the media. If you look back as far as you want to look back, the
Yeah.
media always sucked, period. End of story. You
Mm.
can argue that maybe it's worse now, although I'm not exactly sure that it is. But leaving that for a moment, you then raise the specter, which is unfortunately true, of these radicalized women, which I'm afraid is a consequence of, quote, feminism. Uh, and many of these women are products themselves of broken homes, being raised by yet another single mother, being radicalized to hate men and hate authority. Um,
And also
and
what they call in sociology toxic empathy.
yes,
They're empathizing with the violent criminal, not the person who was raped and attacked and robbed by the criminal. It sort of reminds me of people who got all warm and fuzzy over Hamas, right? I mean, it's this weird kind of radicalized, misplaced empathy. I don't know what happened with this
well, it's
woman,
kind of a Stockholm syndrome, right?
right?
That you're identifying with the villain, um, which maybe makes you more, quote, empathetic. But the other thing, and I raised this in the article, is that the majority of the people that do these protests, it's really for their own ego, right? Uh, They got nothing going on in their life. I mean, consider this. What woman would put the fact that, okay, she didn't have her kids with her, but she's got 3 kids at home. She's going to put herself in harm's way. Why do that?
It's it's the same reason that the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg went to the went to the electric chair. I suppose people are dying for a cause that is misguided at best, obviously. But whatever I don't know what it is about these causes that cause that kind of completely irrational radicalization. I mean, it's I think
Well, no, it makes them feel very important. All right. As I say, unsympathetically in the article, if you're a loser, you got nothing going on in your life, what's the easiest thing to do? Join a cause. Okay, it doesn't matter what the cause
step out and get active, and it's exciting because you don't really have any kind of internal life. You don't have any meaning. You probably don't believe in God. You don't probably. I mean, in this case, I mean, she seemed to have a family life. I don't know. It's you get people. I mean, they're going to leave their children and go out and. I mean, I suppose it was like that radical Islamized couple in San Bernardino that, they'd left the children with the neighbor. They had young children at home, the 2 of them, a married couple. And then they went in and they opened fire at their place of work. It's like, what would lead that? What would lead someone to that? It's really quite vexing. I mean, I want to look at I suppose if you completely subsume yourself in some kind of radical politics, then you no longer exist for yourself. You exist for some kind of external cause, some sort of as you say, it's very narcissistic in a way.
Well, it creates a meaning for your life. Somehow you take on this cause bigger than yourself. But the fact is that what a crummy cause. All right. Is it worth dying, which is what happened to her? Yeah. To what end? Within the thousands of illegals that are being rounded up, are there some that shouldn't have been rounded up? Maybe. Is that worth your life?
Right. I mean, obviously mistakes are made, but they're really trying to round up the violent criminals, and they're lying when they say, "Oh, they're just taking in people who have been in this country illegally for 20 years." No, they're not. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but the people being picked up are either violent criminals or they're adjacent to violent criminals, which means it's like they're here illegally. I mean, that's you're hanging out with them. I mean, it's hard to prove, but they're putting themselves at risk, and that the American people, I think, even frankly, a lot of liberals want to see these people picked up and removed.
Without a doubt, they can't say it out loud somehow.
But yet the Democratic Party seems to think that this is going to help them. They're going to probably shut down the government, they say, over this to try to defund ICE. You get radicals like Mamdani and them. They seem to be all over this. Is it going to help them? I mean, are they going to win because of this? Who's backing this?
Well, I mean, one of the examples I used was the civil rights and Kent State and so on. But at the end of the day, it didn't really do anything. The war continued for another 3 years.
But at least it was connected to some semblance of a cause, I mean, which is to say, just the unfairness of racism, okay, and it's people being shut out. I mean, even the George.
Yeah, it was a better cause. It was a real cause. Yeah, you can argue.
The Floyd thing, as horrible as he was, police brutality against black men. I get it. I'm not saying it was obviously not systemic like they claimed, but at least it was something that they could justify. This thing is like, illegal aliens who are committing crimes. Like we're supposed to feel like warm and fuzzy over.
Well, it ties into
What is that?
That, well, Donald Trump could cure cancer and raise the dead, and people would still
That's
complain.
what it is. I think you're right. It's hatred for Trump, this irrational, orange man bad. It was the people I saw out on the King's rally. Most of them are in their 80s and 90s. They're just like, maybe a lot of it, frankly, is a social gathering. They're
Yeah.
all, they're getting out. It's like a last hurrah. They're seeing old friends. Maybe, it's like I saw very few young people at that. Very few people, mostly white women, some white men, but very old. And I mean, they were the same people who were protesting in the 60s, probably. And for them, yeah, Vietnam, I mean, it was a reasonable thing to be opposed to. I remember I actually went to one of those rallies I don't know if you did, but I was only like I think I was just like in sixth or seventh grade at the time.
Well, it's one thing to go to a couple of them, but people that made it a lifestyle, it was a whole different thing.
Oh, I know. And even then, I remember going to it and I thought, oh, okay, I don't want to, I don't support the Vietnam War. I'm probably going to go there. And I got there and I just saw a real motley group of real miscontents, just
Yeah, yeah,
really like, and I remember I went with a couple of friends from junior high school. We took the train in and I
yeah.
remember there was a nice, well-dressed couple, elderly couple standing behind us. And I was like, why are they here? And I struck up a conversation. Turns out that they were there because they were old communists who were
Yes,
supporting Ho Chi Minh.
yes.
And I'm like, and I remember it was like a real revelation to me. I'm like, look, I'm against the war in Vietnam, but it's not because I like Ho Chi Minh. It's not because I want I don't have any warm and fuzzy feelings about North Vietnam. But, it was a sort of a weird kind of coalition of, the same people I saw at the King's rally, unattractive, overweight, not that I should
Yeah.
talk, just, really nasty, pale looking, angry with their faces twisted in hate, the same kind of vibe. And I don't think that there's enough of them to really, I mean, obviously, not only do they have their friends goose stepping in the media, like, the Rachel Maddow's of the world and even the mainstream media, but they have at the top very high levels of, nope, 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 no, TikTok is okay. Okay. Was it the high levels? It's the George Soroses of the world and that guy from LinkedIn, right? I forget his name, and
Pretty often.
yeah, Hoffman, and this other one, this Hingham, or whatever his name is, who's like helping China. They have all of that, and I'm concerned. I mean, things are going quite well in this country right now. Things are on schedule. We have a movement that is really jumping forward, and it's more than just Donald Trump. I mean, obviously he's the main man, but he can't do it all alone. You've got some substantial people around him. It's probably the most impressive cabinet since Lincoln, probably more so. And not that every one of them is a sterling, but just some people that are stepping up and they are deporting the criminals. This is the first time in 50 years that more people are leaving than are coming in.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah, and Americans they don't want to talk about the economy because it's good news mainly for Trump, given the fact that they have now raised $350 billion in tariffs and that it hasn't done all these terrible things that they predicted. If anything, people are buying America. And this is what liberals used to talk about. I remember Al Gore, of all people. That was the crux of his campaign for the presidency. Buy American, American label, he talked about. Well, that's what people are doing in response.
What is Al Gore doing these days? You haven't heard much from him.
I have no idea. I mean, jetting around this gas guzzling jet to environmental meetings, I guess. I don't know. I mean, but the point is, and now the Clintons are being indicted. I mean, they might be indicted. They're refusing.
Well, tell me this. You're a big student of politics, what in the world is in it for them to be in contempt of Congress? Why not just go there, give a bunch of typical stupid answers, and leave?
Because they could get caught lying. I mean, I think that it's a typical. You listen to the response by the Clinton's press people when he announced that he will not be testifying, he will not be responding to a subpoena. Let's remember that the Steve Bannon went to prison for a lot less than that.
Yeah.
And it's this sort of that reminded me of the old days of Clinton. I mean, I'm doing this for the American people, he tells us. And Hillary, really? Like the American, it's good for the American people that you're not answering questions of Congress, but it's that kind of arrogance, and I don't think it's going to work for them this time.
You know what? Even if they are sick of them.
I don't think anybody cares now. They no longer have that. People are tired. You're right. They're sick of them.
This is the point. They didn't go gently into the good night, right? Yeah, they did their thing back in the 80s, 90s, whatever. But why cause trouble now? Nobody cares about you, right?
Yeah.
So you're not reflecting well at the moment.
No, it's not going to look good. And if I wouldn't actually be surprised if Comer does move on having them detained. I mean, that would be that would be amazing, frankly. But after all these years and all these decades of them being one tiny step ahead of the law, all of a sudden it catches up. It would be like karma. It would be just a just desserts. I think that the American people generally would applaud, even people that kind of were on their side. Nobody likes them. They're not like and Hillary too. I mean, the two of them could be in adjourning cells. Oh my God, that would be what a whew, boy. Okay. Anyway, let's not get too giddy. It's probably not going to happen.
Well, we'll keep following that story.
Yes, but in the meantime, I think that things are going quite well. I don't know if there's going to be a groundswell of support for Republican congressmen. I think that they're trying all the usual tricks in terms of trying to stack the deck and steal the election, quite frankly. Oh, is that a problem for TikTok? Uh-oh. No, but the Supreme Court just came down with a decision that indicates that Republican candidates can sue jurisdictions if they keep counting ballots after the election day. That's a big one. People don't realize. But
it is a big one because in general, the courts do not like getting involved in elections.
Yes.
For obvious
reasons. We found that out in 2020.
Yeah.
But let's not go too far into that because TikTok people don't like that subject. The point is that they keep counting and counting and counting and counting until they get what they want. Even in this last election in 2024, I seem to recall that they were still counting like 3 weeks later in certain congressional districts in California. Am I wrong?
No, yeah. You're right.
And they finally got their answer they wanted, and they declared the Democrat the winner with like 100 votes. They finally.
I think it was less actually, but
yeah.
I always maintain that the turn of California to a deep blue state was completely fraudulent. There's simply no way that could have happened. And It's funny, you don't see any of these articles. Remember, we had a governor that was Republican nominally in Schwarzenegger up until 2011. And then suddenly it became this 1,000% blue state. I don't buy it. I never did.
Yeah, I mean, what's happened? I mean, I think that it's illegals voting. That was shown, I think, in terms of Hillary getting, 2 million votes.
Yeah.
People were bringing them in wagon cars. I mean, it was, it makes like, well, Fulton County in Georgia, they now have 400,000 votes that are sitting in a warehouse. I mean, Steve Bannon says, get the sheriff to go down there, kick open the door, and take them out. I don't know why they're not, but they finally have acknowledged that this exists and that, it's moving forward, but they will not let them go. But I think that's nothing compared to California.
Well, I mean, some of this is so institutional that it sets up its own barriers. Let's make the analogy with what's coming out on vaccines now. This was an article of faith. You had to take these vaccines, and they were the greatest thing in the world. And this is why people don't get these horrible diseases, and on and on and on. Okay, so now Steve Kirsch and others started asking, well, where's the data? Well, it turns out there is no data. All right. But not only that, the people on the pro-vaccine side truly, truly believe that there's data.
Because they've been told it and they haven't really dug.
Yeah.
And speaking of data, I think it's like about all blue states are being sued, including Massachusetts, my state, of not clearing their voter rolls. I mean, this is when during the Clinton times, when they went in with the Motor Voter Act and this other act, there were promises made that as Republicans were concerned back then, of course, that the voter rolls would be examined and cleaned every couple of years, and that you would basically remove people who had passed away or who had moved out of state, or the name couldn't be connected to an address. I mean, obvious non-votes. And they haven't done it. And then they hired this group called ERIC, ERIC, that was supposed to do this. Turns out they're nothing but a bunch of hacks. They didn't do it. They probably raked in who knows how many tens of millions of dollars. And they signed up something like 25 states, including some red states, to Massachusetts did not sign up with them, by the way. And that turned out to be a fraud. And they just haven't done it. So now the Attorney General's office, particularly Harmy Dillon at the Civil Rights Division, are suing these states to get them to release the data so it can be examined. And they're not doing it. They're refusing to do it.
They can get away with it based on this whole idea of the invincible institution, if you will. Okay? I mean, how long have people been complaining about how bad the schools are, how bad colleges are?
Mm-hmm.
But this is such a fundamental institution that it has its own sort of inertia that.
Well, how do they? I mean, how can they possibly explain why they will not want their now? There's been a victory recently by Judicial Watch. It took a private law firm, Judicial Watch, to sue to get this information purged. The data purged, and they won. Just in Oregon, of all places, Oregon has now agreed that they're going to be removing 600,000 names from the ballot that have been identified by Judicial Watch. It took years.
Well, Oregon's a special case in that once you get outside of Portland, Oregon's a fairly conservative place. And
right, but then Portland kind of runs the show. And the point I'm making with that is that why do you have to have a private law firm get them to do this? Isn't anybody asking about why the state won't do this?
It's sort of the same reason. Remember when that, what was it called? Healthcare.gov website got put up for Obamacare. And it cost like $1 jillion.
Right.
And it didn't work and so on. And the question that was asked me, because I was deep in DC at that time, well, how can this be? They spent all this money. I said, they spent all this money with the usual suspects. There's 5 companies that get most of the government IT. They're all terrible, all right? They don't care because, as the expression goes, they don't have to, right?
No, they have an incentive to not care. Then they could come in and get another couple of millions and fix it.
Yeah,
It's like the way a lot of these welfare agencies work. I mean, they actually get more money if there's more problems. They're not solving poverty.
yeah.
We've talked about how the war on poverty costs $80 trillion with a T, right? Now, if they had taken, I mean, I'm just going to repeat this for the sake of TikTok. If they had taken even the tiniest fraction of that money, like even like maybe 100 billion, maybe even 10 billion, maybe even 3 billion, they could have eliminated poverty in this country.
Well, right, but then that would give up all the opportunities for fraud.
Well, that's right. That's my point. But nobody asks if they could have solved poverty with $5 billion by setting up accounts for people who earn less than a certain amount and let them draw from it to get up to that amount. Oh, there's the warning at TikTok. That must have been it. Okay. TikTok, thank you for, I'm just going to sign off on TikTok. Thank you for joining me, everyone. Check out the program at Rumble. Have a wonderful afternoon. So much for TikTok. I get
what did we say this time?
Well, they won't tell you, but I mean, was it the comment about the war on poverty? I don't know. That might have been the trigger. Anyway, getting back to where were we?
Well, and then the whole debate would have been, right? Well, how can you be against that? Are you in favor of poor people starving and so on? So you get these ridiculous dialectics with these liberal morons. And maybe now we have the courage of our convictions to say, look, it's all fraud. It's all BS.
It is. And it's not, I mean, I'm now in my sociology course. I just started again. And the course is healthcare and sociology, right? It's about health, disease, and sociology. And the main thing is people are too poor. Well, guess what? I mean, can't they could do the same thing with healthcare by setting up accounts for people who earn under, or either that, or I remember, I think it was in the 90s, there was a proposal that's been forgotten, and I don't remember all the details, but it was basically have a national insurance pool that would help people who earn less than a certain amount could buy into this for like $500 a year, divided into 12 payments, affordable. And even if they couldn't do that, well, fine. They could get, if they qualify, they could get access to this insurance. And the insurance would cover catastrophic illnesses, not your everyday thing, you get copay, which, it goes to people who can afford that. Because obviously when you're poor, you can't afford everything. You're not going to have it handed to you. But you could reach the point where we do want to have people covered who have catastrophic illness. If you have, Aunt Sally all of a sudden has a disease where it's going to cost like $1 million or she's going to die, you want her to get the treatment she needs, right? I think the taxpayer could have handled that for people who couldn't afford it. It would have reduced the cost of insurance because it would have taken those big cases off of their rolls. And it would have reduced the argument of poverty because it would have been available to people who needed it. But they won't do that. Instead, they're pushing socialism. They want to have, everyone has to have equal. No, that means everyone's going to get less. And the very wealthy are going to get it off the record anyway. That doesn't work. Look at Canada. Look at Britain. It's you have to wait 6 months. They have Corey scores, and if you're too old or you're too ill, you don't get the treatment because your life is seen as not worth living. So it's not a moral system, and it doesn't work. So I think that Trump is addressing this. This is why I say we have
with his answer to fixing Obamacare. I believe today it was announced. And of course, Obamacare was a scam,
right?
Because all it did was take the hard cases and put them all on Medicaid, and then limit the choices. It was just a bonanza for the insurance industry. In terms of pooling different risks, insurance companies don't like that. When we started our business in the mid 70s, we were able to get extremely good health insurance under what was then called NEST, National Employer Security Trust. Right? What happened was they got together and said, okay, every company that's in the manufacturing business, I think with fewer than 100 employees, it was some criteria, we're going to group all you together. Well, there's a lot of companies like that. So we ended up getting primo health insurance, right? And that lasted for about a year and a half. The insurance company said, oh, no. We reserve the right to charge Mike's company some extortionate rate because he's only got 25 employees. And that just all fell apart. So it's all greed. The health, I don't cry too many tears for insurance companies.
No. In
or
fact,
the way the government handles it.
And we've talked about some people who have common interests. In the case in the United States, that means Christians, who they get together as families and they pool resources so that their members can get coverage if there's a catastrophic problem. And that this was actually done in certain Central American and Latin American countries, particularly Cuba, before Castro, where they had what was called these centros, which could have membership anything from a couple of hundred to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people who would sign up, usually as families, mostly, and they would all contribute. They'd all pay into the system. I think some more, some less, depending on income, and that the system would provide insurance coverage for expensive, high-end items. Some of them did different things. They all were very different. Some of them had social element to it. They had whatever. I mean, it was a free market thing, and it was brilliant. I mean, Castro got rid of it, but who knows why? I mean, then he brags about having a great healthcare system in Cuba. But I only bring it up to note that there are ways in a free market context where this can be addressed, and they're not. I want to go to what I was talking about on the headline, the Concert of Nations. Trump is reordering the entire world order. He is going back to a paradigm that existed before World War One, not the colonial part of that with the Great Game. That's not what I mean. Although that was part of it, but more sovereign nations operating in their own self-interest, representing their own people, balancing and checking each other's powers in the same way that the United States is set up with a system of checks and balances between not only branches of government, which check each other theoretically, but also the states, which check the federal government and each other, and communities and counties within the states, which check state power and each other, right on down to the individual. It's a general system that Trump is going back to, and he's rejecting the system that was really launched with World War One and Wilsonianism and internationalism and transnationalism, which was world order run by an informal and unelected group of wealthy people, banking families, cultural figures, and other motley people who sort of formed an informal alliance based on shared values. And when I say values, I don't mean it in a good way. And
shared values that they
had, very amoral and kind of situational, and that basically wanted to exercise control on a world level. Now, Trump is returning to a paradigm that existed again in this country before World War One, where we asserted the Monroe Doctrine, which was, in other words, we respected, and this was under Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, was really the author of that during the James Monroe administration. And the principle was that we would respect the sovereign rights of all nations in the Western Hemisphere and would protect them against foreign adventures and interference by, the one example back then was when the French seized Mexico during the American Civil War. They took advantage of America's weakness by installing a Habsburg king, Maximilian, on the throne of Mexico. That was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. Mexico took care of it itself, as in poor Maximilian was put in front of a firing squad. But the point is that it didn't happen again until Cuba. And at that time, Kennedy talked about the Monroe Doctrine. They did the Bay of Pigs invasion, but I think Kennedy got cold feet and it didn't go over. So the result is that Cuba was a direct interference in the Western Hemisphere. And since then, Cuba has initiated other communist setups, Nicaragua, Venezuela, maybe even Brazil, which is a big one. And Trump is reasserting this idea of the Western Hemisphere as sovereign from not only foreign nations, but foreign ideologies. And he did it when he grabbed Maduro. Now, that's having a huge impact in ways that people can't even imagine, not just in terms of putting back the drug trade, but also cutting oil to not only Cuba, and Cuba's going to fall because of that, probably like a piece of old banana peel. They're not going to. They might be hanging around for another maybe year, but they can't survive that. But also that Venezuela was supplying oil to Iran. They had some kind of weird trade deal. They had Iranian Hamas people in Hezbollah, or no, I think it was more Hezbollah in Venezuela training. They were also trading with China. China had a delegation there protecting Maduro or meeting with him and ensuring him he's going to be fine about a week before the grab. Cuba, of course, he had his armed guards were all Cubans. Cuba had a deal where they would protect his communist regime, and then he would send them oil. All of that the whole apple cart has been thrown over on that. And Venezuela is cooperating with the United States, even if they don't do so publicly. The other apple that's going to fall from the tree is Greenland, which resets the Arctic, theater, the Arctic Great Game. Denmark was for sterilizing women in Greenland for decades, right up to the 1990s, by the way. And, they're acting like a classic colonial old power. And Greenland really belongs to the Western Hemisphere. And Trump made the case that it really belongs to the United States in the same way that Hawaii belongs to the United States. It has to be part of the United States if we're going to defend it. It can't just be, some protectorate. It should be a part of the United States. And I think that that will complete the whole arc of the Western Hemisphere. Other nations, other civilizations are asserting themselves in the world, and they are developing their spheres of influence, and that all of these different spheres of influence compete with each other, trade with each other, have diplomatic relations, maybe don't. But the point is that it generally leads to a more peaceful world and a freer world.
Well, what do you think if you were a fly on the wall in NATO? What do they really think about this Greenland business?
Somebody made a sarcastic comment that NATO, they're like all this posturing about supporting and sending troops to help Ukraine. They're not sending anyone to help Ukraine. They're sending troops to Greenland. It's like it's old. It's the old game. NATO is very corrupt. I understand that there's this Operation Gladio. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's like these military units that were left over after World War II that are involved with a lot of clandestine activity, and it kind of gives a sort of a foundation for NATO. I think that it's time its time is long past. World War II has been over now for 80 years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Russia is not going to invade Europe. They can't because they've been checkmated in Ukraine. That's a stalemate, right? Russia has grabbed the border territories that have been disputed over 1,000 years, but they're not going to take the main piece, and Ukraine is not going to recover that border. So they've reached a stalemate, and I hope they come to an agreement because if they don't, I don't think Europe's going to go to war for them. It's just
No.
going to drag on, and more people are going to be murdered and killed, and it's a terrible tragedy. You're going to have a meat grinder. More and more young men are going to be killed on both sides, and it's a horrible tragedy if they can't come to an agreement. I think the main obstacle to agreement probably is Zelensky, which Trump has noted today, by the way. Um, and I think that the agreement is going to have to be that that Ukraine will retain its sovereignty, but it will not be. They won't have any. The Europe will admit that they're not going to come to war for them. Um, we'll probably continue to supply them with
Well, I
weapons.
think that's what's going to happen in Greenland too. It's one thing for the Danes to say that we reject the U.S.'s interest in Greenland. Well, what are you going to do about it?
Right, exactly. I think they sent over. I mean, Trump cracked a joke about this. They sent over a bobsled.
Yeah.
There's like 35,000 people there. Um, that Europe is like, I don't know if it's lost, but it's been severely compromised by Islamic immigration, millions of people. They thought maybe, I think I mentioned to you that years ago I interviewed Peterson, who I think James Peterson, he was the head of the New York Federal Reserve. He came out with a book predicting a lot of things that have now happened. He said, birth rates in Europe are low, and so they're going to, in order to maintain their welfare states, they're going to start bringing in Africans and Middle Eastern people with the assumption that they're going to work and pay taxes. Now, he was wrong about that part of it because yeah, I mean, so what's happened is that those countries are now teetering on bankruptcy. They're not producing anything. They have a population of Muslims from the Middle East who are not interested in assimilating. There was a sociological study done in Denmark, of all places, where these sociologists followed several Palestinian families who had settled in Copenhagen and in Denmark. I think it was a very comprehensive study that went on for like 20 years. They kept track of them. They kept records. When they arrived, they were all on about 85% of them on welfare. I think
Who came up with the idea, to interrupt, that we're going to import people and put them on welfare? What's the net gain?
I know, and why is that a virtue? Is this supposed to be something humane about that? Ripping off a country and importing people who are not poor, by the way, and bringing them in so they can pay them and just to be here?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, the Palestinians, I mean, a high percentage of them were unemployed. A high percentage of them were involved with crimes. All these other social problems, rapes and murders and, different, they didn't learn the language of none of like about 40%. And they came back like 20 years later and it hadn't changed.
No.
They had not assimilated. And now they're saying the same thing about the Somalis in Minneapolis and Columbus, Ohio, and Maine, which are the three locations where Somalis were literally settled and deliberately such by the Obama and then the Biden regimes. And it's the same deal. There's this young Texan congressman. I don't know if you've seen him. Gill, I think his name is.
Yeah, Matt Gill.
Yeah, he's great. He really nailed this in testimony, in committee testimony, where he had an expert on from Minnesota, and he's like, so the Somalis, what, 85% of them are on welfare? 79% of them don't speak the language and have no interest in learning it. And he went over all these statistics, and the guy from Minnesota had nothing to say other than these are inappropriate questions. They're racist. Did you see that? It's all over
Yes.
you. Yeah, I mean but the point is that they are not assimilating. I have nothing
No,
against.
but that doesn't matter. You see, we create these verbal constructs where merely asking that question is, quote, racist. All right.
Well,
And then what makes it even better, it was sort of funny to watch this soy boy squirming in his seat. But no, you can't ask that.
it's inappropriate. And Gil is like, it's inappropriate that you're not answering questions before a congressional committee. That's what's inappropriate. But yeah, I mean, I think that the way to approach that is to point out that this is a much bigger and more systemic problem than simply the Somalis. This is something that's happening in all 50 states. It's something.
It's a whole mindset that was created, unfortunately, by the Civil Rights Act. That this whole thing took on a life of its own. So
Right.
now, let's say that we're going to complain about Ilhan Omar. Well, you can't do that because that's racist and sexist. And I'll tell you, there are people on the right that fall into this. When Hugh Hewitt had a radio show, I'll never forget this, in LA.
Yeah.
And we were talking about when Lieberman and Gore and Lieberman were running. And I started making negative comments about Lieberman. Well, that's anti-Semitic.
Oh, well, look at Obama played that card throughout his whole presidency.
Yeah.
Any criticism of Obama was because you didn't like him because he's black. I had a sociology professor who said, during one of his lectures, he goes, the reason why the American people have lost faith in their government is because Obama was black. I'm like, what? I mean, what do you mean by that? I mean, it's you can't go with that kind of reason.
Well, it's an all-purpose excuse.
It's also a defamation of the American people. It's a lie. And it's a defamation of conservatives. They don't.
Perfect rhetorical device. All right. If you say anything bad,
it has to be challenged. And I've said this. I pointed out the fact that Obama, when he ran for the U.S. Senate in a special election in Illinois after his predecessor had been, I think he went to prison. I don't even remember who it was.
Yeah.
But he had an opponent by the name of Alan Keyes, who was a former ambassador to the UN, who happens to be black. And had Keyes won that election and immediately started running for president, which is what Obama did, and had he been elected president, conservatives would have rallied around him. He was a hero in the conservative world. There's nothing to do. They don't care about race. I mean, it's a lie, and it's defamatory toward the American people. It accomplishes several things. It protects the perpetrator of crime, usually in the case of Ilhan Omar, but it also smears the American people by claiming that they got something against her because she's black. It's a complete lie, and it has to be called out for that. No one has anything against her for being black. I mean, Carol Swain is black. She wrote the 1776 Project. It's a brilliant piece of history. She's a hero amongst conservatives. It challenged that stupid Project 1614, whatever that thing was. I'm just saying, we have to call that out. No, it's not because they're black. Sorry, ain't true. Now, whether or not it might have something to do with their being Muslim, that's an ideological question. Is Islam compatible to American way of life?
Well, in a word, no.
Yeah, I would say not as well. And it doesn't. And Islam is not a race. You can have plenty of white Muslims who are just as bad. It's an ideology that is not compatible to the American constitutional system. You know, did they say that about Catholics? They did, but they were wrong. Did they say it about Jews? They did, but they were wrong. In the case of Islam, they're not wrong. It is not compatible. Now, that doesn't mean that all Muslims are not compatible. I mean, I've interviewed Dr. Zuhdi Jasser on this program back when I was on with Patrick O'Heffernan. I should probably have him on again. He is leading a movement in the United States that wants to Americanize Islam. He's very pro-American. He's very pro-West, but he's a minority. It's just that simple. I mean, he's a great man, but that doesn't.
Well, then you get into semantics, though. All right. If you Americanize Islam, then it's not really Islam.
Of course not. But the point is, if they want to do that and they want to keep maybe a couple of traditions and look at, I mean, fine. I mean, I'll call it Islam. And yeah, you know, I support them and I hope they make inroads. And there are some moderate Muslim traditions. I mean, I'll point to this young man I just had on the show, who's the head of the Turkestan government in exile. He was he's Salih Hudayar. He's a young guy. I think that he makes the point, and accurately, that the Central Asian countries, like East Turkestan or like Kazakhstan, they are very moderate Muslims, and they're very tolerant. That goes back 1,000 years. They've always had minorities. They've had Nestorian Christians. They've had Jews. They've had Buddhists. You know, they don't really, you know, they're not into, you know, it's not the Sunni Muslim. It's another sect. So, you know, you can have that. I don't in any way discount that. But that's not what we're talking about here. That doesn't describe the Somalis. Anyway.
They're just freeloaders. And there was a calculated scheme of bringing them into the country, giving them welfare, buying the votes. And now started before Obama, to be honest. There were Somalis in Maine way before Obama.
And they vote as one bloc. And that's why they have political party. And that's why I think Obama and Biden, or whoever was running that kind of regime, that's why they kept them concentrated in one place. That's why they sent them to select cities so they would wield that kind of political power, you know, and they chose, you know, I mean, Columbus, Ohio, because they'd like to break the back of the Republican majority in Ohio, I think. And probably very well may. I think Texas.
Well, it was pretty cynical to do stuff like that.
And look, Islamic forces are planning on taking over the United States. Steve Bannon has been talking about this. He was in Texas. Texas is a big target. They pointed to a map and said, we're going to get Dallas next. Look, they've already made major inroads in New York, right? With Mamdani. But, you know, Texas is like the big kahuna. Texas is the very heart of America. If Texas goes, the whole country goes. You know, they have to stand up in Texas and stop.
Well, right now, they stopped immigration from, 75 countries?
Yeah.
And I think it's long past due.
So they are, you know, I think that, you know, Trump is stopping the immigration from those countries and the screaming about him having something against people because of their race. I say to hell with that.
I would just raise the question I raised before. Why allow people to immigrate and then put them on welfare? Please defend it.
No, I mean, I had somebody say to me that, well, don't you think it's racist to not allow immigration from these certain countries? And I'm like, okay, how about we really help? If you're such a, you know, humanitarian, why not take, you know, 30 million Yemenites and just fly them into the United States, right? Then you'll really make this a logical conclusion.
Well, I mean, I have even a more fundamental argument. All right, is it racist? Well, what if it is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose I don't think it. I honestly don't think it is because I
No,
think
I
that
don't think
I
it's
think it's
racist. The point
cultural.
is, if you're going to raise that banner for everything,
Yeah.
then you have to explain to me why it's bad to be racist.
Well, I think it is bad to be racist, but I think that it's
Well, okay, but
I'm
let's
not going
let's
to judge someone based on on their racial background. I'm going to judge them on their culture, and the culture is what the focus should be.
okay.
And the culture is not compatible to with American culture. They don't want to assimilate. Alan Dershowitz explained this, very well. He said, "Look, there are ethnic groups that have come into this country that completely Americanized. Even during the American Revolution, for example, the Huguenots. The
Yeah,
Huguenots, they were French, they were Protestants were kicked out of France because of their religion. They came here, they're more American than anyone. I mean, they didn't maintain even any identity as Frenchmen. You
right.
have other groups who came here and they did maintain ethnic identity to a certain degree, the Irish, the Jews, the Italians, right? They maintained ethnic identity, but they completely embraced the American way of life. They completely acculturated into the American system. And the difference between that and the Muslims, frankly, and I'm talking about maybe specifically, certain Muslims, is that they're not interested in assimilating into American life. My grandparents, when they came here, they broke their back trying to be as American as possible. I remember that, they were super patriotic. They became Republicans. They were like, they loved this country, and they still maintained their identity as Jews, and they continued to go to synagogue. They're as American as apple pie. Same thing with Italians. Same thing with the Irish. That's not the case here. They're not interested in doing that. They are separatists. They want to create their own. They want to take over the United States, and that's what they're doing in Europe. Because well, the United States is different than Europe. Not really. Look at Dearborn, Michigan. I mean, I don't think it is. So it's nothing to do with their race,
Yeah.
because they are multiracial, by the way. It has to do with a culture, a religious system that is political. It's more than religious. So that's how I see it. I mean, it's
Well,
not
I
completely.
guess you could make the larger argument, though, that you're discriminating on the basis of culture, whatever. But I would say a good first step would be you got to be able to support yourself if you immigrate.
Exactly.
Where the bottom fell out of that, God knows. All
I
right.
mean, my grandparents that came here, they did any kind of work they could get their hands on. They never asked for anything from anybody, and they were poor, and they did all kinds of work. Some of it a little unsavory on my mother's side, but that's beside the point. Um,
Ah,
but the point is that they did what they had to do. They weren't asking for handouts. They were not looking for the system to support them. They recognized, and they didn't expect it. They recognized that they had to make their own way, and they did. And eventually they became successful.
so this is my point. If the whole idea of, especially in Europe, bringing in all these people to try to cover the fact that there's no reproductive rate, so now we can pay for welfare programs. What's the logic of bringing in people and putting them on welfare? I
It
mean,
makes absolutely no sense.
but more than that, how come there was no objection on the part of European people?
I think
I
that
never heard.
I know it. It's weird. I mean, like today in Great Britain, I mean, the name Muhammad is the biggest name in the country for
Yeah.
children. There are more mosques than there is Church of England. What happened to the Church of England? At one time it was a great moral
Now that
institution,
was a long time ago.
and I think even the Catholics. I mean, what's the deal with Pope Leo putting a Muslim prayer room in St. Peter's Cathedral? I mean, why? I don't get it.
Well, because he wants to be. Cause, all right, you want to know why?
I do.
Speaking as a Catholic, all right,
Yes.
because he's a soy boy, and he wants to get along with the rest of the other soy boys that are mostly in the College of Cardinals, with some notable exceptions. All right, they become corrupted. Um, and he, doesn't want to do anything bold, like try to clean it up.
Well, I mean, that's a troubling precedent. I would hope that there'd be a more Catholic Pope. I mean, what happened to the Crusades when we need them?
Well, that's a very good question. Fortunately, as I emphasize to my Catholic friends, how much interaction do you actually have with the Pope? None. All right. How does it affect your faith? Zero. But what you see is, if people want to leave the church or complain about the church, well, I don't like the Pope. Okay. You can still be a Catholic.
Of course. I mean, the church transcends any Pope.
Yeah.
It's
you have to remember, the model of the church is the Virgin Mary, not any of these feckless men, including Peter himself,
right,
who were put in charge.
I've always noticed that about Catholicism. I think that in the Catholic pantheon, you've got Mary and Jesus almost equal, and they're both sitting at the left and the right side of God. Am I wrong?
Well, you're not exactly correct, but the point is the importance of Mary and the fact that she is the model. If you're looking at mortal human beings,
right?
All right. So there are very few, unfortunately, excellent popes in entire history. There were some who were very bad. There were some who were pretty good.
I thought that John Paul II was pretty good.
Well, he was, but he started a trend, and he's a saint. He started a trend.
He played a major role in the collapse of communism, actually.
Yeah. No, I mean, he had some negatives, but the positives certainly overrode that.
I think so.
There were people that complained about him opening kind of an ecumenical door to Islam, which I think was a mistake.
Right.
But certainly there were people who were a lot worse. But I think Leo was just a quote American, which was silly. He spent more time in Peru. Fine.
They should have brought in that African card.
Well, he's been a leading candidate in the conservative side for decades, but he always seems to get bypassed, doesn't he?
They don't want to have it like, I think it was Cardinal Sarah. They don't want to have it. They really, it's the establishment is unfortunately, the same liberal, not as bad.
Well, what they're afraid of is that if the church goes back to being the church, they're going to lose people without acknowledging that they've already lost those people.
They gain people. They would. Well, they'd find their moral voice, and young people, especially, I think, would come to them in droves.
Well, actually, they are. But it was this idea that it was fostered that, well, we can't really be too heavy on this. And this ridiculous attack on the Latin Mass.
I remember that whole thing. I remember back in was it Cardinal Lefebvre or Lefebvre?
Yeah.
He was like villainized for that. Just that one.
Well, see, that was one of my complaints about John Paul II, is he could have defended the guy and he didn't.
Right.
Now, maybe he thought there was a larger issue, but I think that they're trying to be nicey nice, and they don't realize that doesn't work. Nobody wants to be in an organization unless they can be proud of it.
Right.
You're not going to be proud of the organization just because we lowered the standards so much that we're letting in every Tom, Dick, and Harry, regardless of what they believe. So I think they'll come around.
Obviously, to Judaism with conservative and reform, it's completely sold out to the left. It's socialist, and they've lost people. It's become like the Unitarian Church. It doesn't have any content. There's no reason, especially for men, to go there and be involved. It's like there's nothing there for you. There's
it's a social club. Social club.
and it's a social club dominated by left-wing women. It's like there's no, I mean, why go? Why be involved? It's sort of lost. Whereas at the same time, the religious movement in Judaism has become a little bit on the extreme side, frankly.
Well, it's a reaction. It's a
Yeah,
reaction.
exactly. So it's maybe the same thing is happening in Christianity. I don't know, but there's
Well, we can go into that next time, but
exactly. So anyway, but great article at the Substack,
well, thank you.
and
And it was kind of fun writing it, throwing out all that Shakespeare stuff.
oh, it was great. Yeah, that's just like I feel it rolled right off the pen.
Yeah,
All right,
there
so,
you go.
so I'll talk to you next week, and be well.